So good morning everybody and welcome to Community Woodland Association's session on approaches to long-term sustainability of rhododendron control. I'm delighted to have you join us today, and I'm delighted to have three people who are very experienced in this field join us too. Firstly, we have Gordon Gray-Stevens, who's a member and director of Native Woods and works with other members on a range of woodland contracts around Scotland, specialising in native woodlands. Gordon provides woodland advice to a range of woodland owners and managers. He runs workshops on small-scale forestry and is very involved in Community Woodlands Association itself, having been one of its founding directors and now acts as company secretary. We're also joined by Rob Dewar, who currently is the National Trust for Scotland's Invasive Species Project Officer. He has a vast experience working with the National Trust as a ranger and then heritage advisor before undertaking his current role. And Rob has recently been awarded the Churchill Fellowship to study invasive non-native species and biosecurity in New Zealand, which sounds very exciting indeed, Rob. We're also delighted to have Grant Holroyd from Knoydart Forest Trust with us. Grant's a well-kent face across the Community Woodland network, and he has worked with Knoydart since its conception in 1999. He's been intrinsic in driving forward the development of the trust and the management of the local circular economy. Rhododendron management at Knoydart has played a vital role in managing Knoydart Forest Trust, and I very much look forward to hearing about what actions were taken and continue to be taken at Knoydart today. Before we begin, I'd ask that you indulge me in telling you a little bit about Community Woodlands Association, as we have a few members joining us today. Community Woodlands Association helps communities connect to their woodlands. We have over 200 members, most of whom are community groups owning or managing woodland in Scotland. One of the benefits of being a Community Woodland Association member is that we advocate in the political arena on behalf of our members. So for example, we've recently responded on behalf of our members to the deer control consultation and are currently responding on the land reform consultation. We provide support and advice to communities who are looking to start up a community woodland group or who already have a woodland group and are looking for ongoing support. We listen to our members' needs and then support with training sessions, exchange visits, mentoring programmes, and we also have an annual conference. We have Piers Voicey in our team, our professional forester, who is able to provide paid advice and consultancy to any groups, and we work in partnership with strategic partners across. If you're not a member and you'd like to be a member, then please scan this QR code here and it will take you to the page on our website so that you can find out more information there, what you need to do. And I will put in the chat as the presentation goes out on today, I'll put in the chat the link to do that. So we have an hour and a half this morning to share our information, and our plan is that we will, Gordon will speak first, then followed by Rob. Depending on time, we'll have a little screen break. If we're running over time, then perhaps not. Then Grant will provide us with information about Knoydart, and then if we have time, we'll have questions for a panel. But we do welcome interaction throughout the sessions. Also, if you have a pertinent question at the time that the presenter is speaking, please put your virtual hand up and you can intervene, or please ask questions in the chat. I will monitor the chat and let the presenters know if they've not seen the comments coming in. So without any further ado, I'm going to pass you over to Gordon. And Gordon, if you want to take control of the slides, turn your mic on, then we can get started. Thank you.
Good morning and welcome everyone. Glad to be here talking to you about invasive rhododendron today. A little bit about me to start with. Sharon's already introduced me, so I'll not dwell on this too long, but I'm a member of the Native Woods Cooperative. And one of the things I do is also provide a bit of strategic support to the Alliance of Scotland's Rainforest. So very much engaged in rainforest restoration personally at the moment, and great to be able to spread the message around that, but also to look at invasive rhododendron control across areas which are not part of the rainforest. So today I'm going to talk about why rhododendron management is important and what that means in different areas across Scotland. And I'm going to talk a little bit about understanding national policy approaches to controlling invasive rhododendron. I'll try and talk for about 20 minutes, and that should then leave some time for questions at the end of this session. So I always start with some history.
Gordon, can I interrupt you? Sorry, you've not taken control of the slides, so they're not moving for people. Perfect, thank you.
Sorry about that.
Not at all.
Yeah, so brief history of rhododendron in Scotland. Essentially, it's a European and American parents that were introduced into Britain and have hybridized in Britain, creating the invasive plant that we know. So it's not really rhododendron, but we call it ponticum, but we call it that shorthand, I guess. It was widely planted, particularly by the Victorians, in woodland gardens and as game cover. It is now expanding rapidly, particularly in the west coast of Scotland, but elsewhere as well. And we're not dealing with all rhododendron. So there are some really important woodland gardens on the west coast of Scotland, jam-packed with other sorts of rhododendron, which are better behaved than the invasive species, the ponticum. So what are rhododendron impacts? Basically, I consider it's a light thief. So when you're underneath a rhododendron canopy, no light gets through a dense rhododendron canopy, and that effectively outcompetes any other vegetation. And it also complicates other land management, because where you've got a thicket of rhododendron, you can't do anything else. So it really constrains land managers when they're looking at management options. And generally, as with all invasive species, that simplifies and degrades the environment. So we're ending up with a situation where the most competitive or effective organisms get the upper hand across the whole world, and the rather unique biodiversity of individual parts of the world get degraded as a result. Some folk might say that human beings are the most effective at doing this, but some of the plants that we move around have also proved remarkably effective at destroying native biodiversity or degrading it. And I'm going to take a wee quote from the Scottish Government's approach to invasive rhododendron here. A major cause of designated native woodlands being classified as an unfavourable condition. And really that applies across more than just designated woodlands. There are a lot of woodlands in Scotland which are now suffering from rhododendron invasion. Again, going back to the talking about control in the rainforest specifically, I'm going to talk about some rainforest values. I'm going to look at something called Fissurina alboscripta, which is a lichen found on the west coast of Scotland. Lichens are incredible species. They're a combination of fungi and either algae or cyanobacteria, and a very weird organism as a result of that rather unique combination. Fissurina alboscripta doesn't look very significant maybe, but if we look at the world's distribution of Fissurina alboscripta, that's where it occurs. So it's only found on hazelwood in the west coast of Scotland, in the rainforest. Those are the only known sites for Fissurina alboscripta. It's vanishingly rare, far rarer than giant pandas or elephants and tigers, and yet most people in Scotland don't know that we're host to this rather special organism. It's part of our temperate rainforest. This is a word we hear a lot about. Temperate rainforest, again, is far rarer than its tropical cousin. It needs clean air and equitable climate, and as the name suggests, a lot of rain. That's where the rainforest occurs across the world. Temperate rainforest. We splodges here and there, and the Scottish resource is particularly important. It's the most substantial area of rainforest left in Europe. And that's how we define rainforest in Scotland. So that's the Alliance for Scotland's Rainforest definition of the rainforest zone on the west of Scotland. The Alliance has done some work on the scale of the problem. So within the core rainforest area, we reckon there are more than 12,000 hectares infested by rhododendron, 17,000 hectares of other important woodland sites with rhododendron, 24,000 hectares, 80,000 hectares. So that gives some idea of the scale of the problem. And it has been identified by Scottish Forestry's Native Woodland Survey for Scotland as one of the two top threats to native woodlands in the Highlands of Scotland. That and inappropriate levels of herbivore, particularly wild deer, are the two main threats to the rainforest in Scotland. If you're looking for more information on this, I can point you at this Woodland Trust document that I co-authored with Bob Black. It's available as a PDF at that link, and well worth reading if you want to pick up more information on the subject. How about the rest of Scotland? Well, I think that although there's that blue area on the west coast of Scotland, which is the kind of the core rainforest area, it's not that we don't see rainforest attributes in other parts of Scotland. This is a picture from Fife of a gorge and a triple SI there. And, you know, that's a very nice bryophytic community on the gorge there. So we do see rainforest values and important plant communities outside the rainforest zone itself, particularly in these gorges, and also a lot of designated sites also have lower plant values outside the rainforest zone. So important to consider that when you're looking at management. Other reasons for controlling rhododendron are several, whether you're in the rainforest zone or not. The disease risk of Phytophthora ramorum is something that is spreading across Scotland at the moment. If you're in the southwest of Scotland is effectively, I'm going to say, written off in terms of Phytophthora control. So the grey area and the grey area with the red hatching in the southwest of Scotland, those are areas where Phytophthora is rife, basically. And the aim there, well, essentially, the control it has switched to removal of larch as a component. But larch is the main forest tree that suffers from Phytophthora, but rhododendron also gets Phytophthora ramorum and can act as a host. So where you see these dots, these are every location where Phytophthora has been found in Scotland, and Forest Research are doing a lot of work to keep an eye on this, doing annual surveys. And where there is Phytophthora, they can and will, if you're in the green zone, impose a plant health order, a statutory plant health notice upon the land manager, which requires you to remove the rhododendron within the affected area. So that can be a major driver for rhododendron control outside of the rainforest, and is also a reason to make you eligible for financial support, for grant support. Other reasons for control, and sometimes in a way that might not be approved elsewhere, of doing this on your own without that strategic approach to rhododendron control of removing a whole population. Sometimes the stuff gets in your way. It can be blocking paths, woodland views, landscape features, hut sites, and other developments. Some volunteers love getting stuck into rhododendron. So if you're a community woodland group with a group of active community folk, they might very well appreciate spending their weekends bashing rhododendron. Great scope to enhance people's health and well-being. It's an outdoor gym, basically. However, do be aware that a small group can get overwhelmed by a wall of rhododendron. So be careful what you take on, basically, and be prepared for that long-term effort. It's also really important on restock sites often. So restock sites can be where conifer is being felled and there's bare soil, can be a perfect place for rhododendron to spread, and can also make forestry operations considerably more difficult. So that might be another reason why an individual land manager would decide to control rhododendron. Another reason is where it's starting to spread. So if you haven't got the easiest time to remove rhododendron is when it's 6 inches to 18 inches high, when you can lean down and pull the thing out without too much sweat and get rid of a potential future seed source. This is a trunk road where you can see rhododendron spreading from the main population around the corner here, and it might be appropriate to deal with small invasions on your own rather than wait 10 years for a landscape scale project to arrive if you're concerned about it. So moving on to policy, this is slightly complicated at the moment. So this document, which was published in 2017, is the Scottish Government's approach to prioritising rhododendron control in Scotland. It lays out some principles that still apply, and there's a big chunk of text there which kind of lays out the underlying principles for rhododendron control within Scotland. So there's a firm commitment to dealing with this stuff across land holdings and at a landscape scale, so that you get rid of an entire population of rhododendron. So that commitment and that principle is being reinforced, and increasingly funding is being directed towards landscape scale removal. I could talk a lot more about that document, but most of where the government's focus is, which is on the rainforest zone, is slightly being superseded by this document, which I'm not allowed to talk about yet, because that's the cover of the draft, and it will be launched later this summer by Scottish Government. But essentially what Scottish Government is doing is focusing a lot of their effort for invasive rhododendron control within that rainforest zone. Phytophthora is probably the main exception to that, and also designated sites. But I can say that that underlying principle of control remains and will be strengthened by this document, and I'm very much looking forward to seeing it published. So if this again comes from the old approaches to invasive rhododendron document, you will need to make a strong case if you want to get funding to control rhododendron, unless you've got this problem with Phytophthora. Moving on to what you've got to pay for, and the list is long. Community engagement, engaging land managers before you get a project going, takes time and effort. Surveying and costing is complicated, especially as in this picture when you're looking at a wall of rhododendron on a cliff above a trunk road. That's not cheap rhododendron to control. The pounds per hectare starts to multiply quite dramatically. You need to pay for that actual control, and then for follow-up as well. So it is a long-term issue, as we'll hear from other presenters. The business of rhododendron control is not, there are no quick fixes, basically. Project management, effective project management is really important. And be prepared for contingencies. Things like this come out of rhododendron thickets. So this is a real life case up in Glen Creran. It's relatively minor, but if you've got a thicket of rhododendron and suddenly you come across a wind-blown tree in the middle of it, your contractors are not happy to work underneath that wind-blown tree. Who's going to pay to safely take that tree to bits so that your contractors can get back in and carry on the rhododendron control? But it does all take time. You will come across surprises. People move, so you get them to sign up to your whole population control, and then they sell the house and a new person arrives, and that requires a different approach. Land boundaries and ownerships can be difficult to determine. So in the middle of there's actually a land boundary. So there's a fence there, and that's a boundary between two ownerships. Working out where these boundaries are and getting people's permission is a time-consuming business. Moving on to funding, you need to be aware that, and this is Bob Black hugging a tree. I don't know why that's relevant, but I'd rather like it. Working out how to get money out of funders is never straightforward. A far wiser man than myself once said that the problem with rhododendron control is that funders don't like to pay for taking things away. They want to pay for things which add value. And it's difficult not to move away from the perception that invasive rhododendron control is about taking things away rather than adding things. So that's an important thing to do. You need to get people to pay for work in private gardens, and mainstream funds in land management are focused on people who've got more than half a hectare, who've got BRNs and are registered within the ARPID, the Scottish Government's land management funding system, and gardeners are not. Funders tend to be very short. No, they don't. They tend to be very short term. So getting long-term funding is difficult. So you have to look to funding solutions. And one of the ways to do this is to look at how you can do more than just take away, how your project can be more than just rhododendron control. How can you add value to your project? Some of this is about education and engagement, so bringing people along, and the way in which invasive rhododendron control can engage people with other aspects of rainforest or woodland management and land management generally around their communities. Emphasize rhododendron control takes people, and increasingly rural Scotland is blighted by a declining and an aging population. So there is definitely scope to generate employment and livelihoods from rhododendron control projects. And funders like that aspect of rhododendron control, particularly the Scottish Government at the moment. Also an opportunity for holistic management. I think it's important to be aware that when you remove rhododendron, you create a perfect seed bed for a lot of other plants, including native woodland. But if your deer numbers are too high when you've done your rhododendron control, then you'll get far poorer biodiversity outputs than if you also look at deer management as part of that, as part of your management of the rhododendron. So important, I think, to think about that bigger picture if you are considering rhododendron management, and to make sure your deer control is also in place. And deer control, of course, is another issue that is best dealt with at a landscape scale. Moving quickly on to funds, Scottish Forestry have the Forestry Grant Scheme. It will be mostly focused on the rainforest and designated sites, or where you have Phytophthora and they serve a statutory plant health notice upon you. There is dialogue at the moment with Scottish Forestry about follow-up treatment. So a recognition from Scottish Forestry that they need to support the long-term treatment of rhododendron. And I think we will see in that document that I flashed up earlier, greater recognition of the role that Scottish Forestry have in supporting that longer-term treatment. Nature Scot are delivering Nature Restoration Fund at the moment, and that has delivered considerable funding into the rainforest zone at the moment, and a lot of that has been focused on rhododendron control. They have a small and a large grant scheme. They support development funding, which is really useful. However, it is time limited, and this is one of the things that the Alliance for Scotland's Rainforest will be engaging in dialogue with Scottish Government over this summer to try to get this deadline extended so that we have further funding coming in to nature restoration beyond 2026. Recently announced grant, it was just announced this week, is a smaller nature restoration fund of up to £15,000 that could be really useful for communities looking to develop larger landscape scale projects around their community. So there's a link there with a closing date in July. So if you're thinking about doing something like that, that's something to grab a hold of, and there's a web link there to follow. Lottery funding, both People's Postcode Lottery and the National Heritage Lottery Fund have both put funding into rainforest restoration. Often what they want to see is those added values, those added benefits though. So making your project about more than rhododendron control really works with these two funders particularly. And a final slide about innovative finance. So the Argyll and Isles Coast and Countryside Trust and Alliance for Scotland's Rainforest are working together at the moment on developing the case for investment-ready nature in Scotland, Ferns, supported by Nature Scot and the Heritage Lottery Fund. So this is about, can we bring private finance into nature restoration in the rainforest in a way that works both for communities, for landowners, and for the investors, for the private investors. That's quite a difficult circle to square. But ACT at the moment is doing a considerable amount of work on that, and very much hope that we can find an equitable way to bring additional funding into this arena. So that's me. Thanks very much for listening. I'm sure I've run over my time, but hopefully not by too much, and happy to take any questions if Sharon gives me a minute.
You've got exactly that, Gordon. Well done. You're still within time. Any questions, anybody, before we move on? No, none just now. Gordon, there's in the chat, there's a mention of a broken link for the Woodland Trust org. Maybe if you could find at some point for us a link that works, that would be really helpful.
Okay, I will do that and put it in the chat. Yeah.
Magic. Thanks very much. Okay, we're moving on to Rob. Rob, do you want to take control of the slides? Can't actually see Rob. Where's Rob gone?
My camera.
Oh, you're there.
Have you got me?
I can hear you. I can't see you yet. You've taken control. If you switch your camera on, that would be wonderful.
Just the camera. Okay, there I am.
Superb. And thank you, Tom, for that nice comment for Gordon. Thank you. Okay, over to you, Rob, when you're ready.
Well, thanks, Sharon, for inviting me along to say a little bit about what the National Trust of Scotland are doing in tackling rhododendron control. Thanks, Gordon. That was a really good overview to kick us off. I'm Rob Dewar. I've worked for the National Trust of Scotland for over 20 years now, and I first cut my teeth, so to speak, dealing with rhododendron control as a ranger in the northwest of Scotland, working across 3 beautiful properties, all infested with rhododendron, unfortunately. So I spent many years working with volunteers. I then moved to spread my wings a little bit and became Natural Heritage Advisor, working with various nature conservation work. And in some ways, I've come full circle because I've now taken on a role of invasive species project officer, not manager there, but an officer. Which really focuses me on rhododendron control and invasive species, and it sort of shows how important the National Trust for Scotland take this particular problem of invasive species. I should be moving along to the next slide. Okay, you see that one? Yeah, so the Wipeout project, this has been 3 years. 3 years project, and it's given us a large funding of up to nearly over £1 million spent in the last 3 years on a number of invasive species. You can see some of them there: skunk cabbage, Japanese knotweed, some of the main culprits. But the vast majority of that £1 million has been spent on Rhododendron ponticum, which is it's infested a lot of our woodlands, some of them triple SI sites. National Nature Reserve at Corrichalet Gorge, which is the top right slide, and you can see, as Gordon mentioned before, the expense of how it escalates when you have to get contractors in doing rope access work. So just moving on, this slide actually shows my age a little bit because I recognise that as a Fiat Panda from the 80s. Buried in this thicket of rhododendron, and that slide's really included that just to show that it's not just about protecting ecosystems and habitat and wildlife. It's also about getting the message over that it's responsible land management. And this is on an actual croft at Torridon. The crofter was getting on in years, and we actually stepped in and offered to take all this rhododendron out for him. So now he's got that land back as some useful pasture. So it's about ecosystem restoration, also improving the land as a resource. But really, when you start to tackle rhododendron, it does need to be collaborative, and you do really need to start thinking about landscape scale work initially if you're going to really sort of see the sustainability of this effort. So one of our biggest challenges that we've had, here we are at Torridon, and you can see that this is on the slopes of Leargach. So Torridon is a 17,000 acre National Trust owned mountainous property. And the problem here is we've got rhododendron spreading up from this community, from many of the gardens, seeding right up into very rough terrain, rocky terrain, right up into the mountainside. So whilst we can tackle the work on our ground, we need to engage to try and look at this as a collaborative solution and to try to work with the community. So one of the first things we did was to have workshops, have talks, invite people to the village hall, have volunteer sessions, just to explain what the problem was, and hopefully to try and win hearts and minds to get as many people on board to at least support our effort. And that was quite a difficult challenge, because quite a few people liked the flowering rhododendron. They didn't see it as an ecological problem necessarily. And some of them along this particular site even felt the rhododendron was something of a protective barrier from rockfall. So it was quite a tricky challenge to try and sort of speak with the communities and win some of the people over. So the leaflets, we did some flyers, they all went round houses. We had an invasive species ranger I would endorse that for any sort of large scale projects. If you can get somebody on site working with the communities, somebody that knows the ground and knows the people, that's a great help, as well as working alongside contractors. So this is the same site a few years on, and you can see how effective one of our favoured techniques has been stem treatment. I'll say a little bit more about this later on. But sort of 10 years on, you can see there's I don't see any live rhododendron there. It's all been stem treated, and on a site like this, you can see they've done advantages of using such a technique. You're not going to be wanting to walking across this terrain with knapsacks or chainsaws with all that rock around. So in this particular site, stem treatment had a lot of advantages, and it can be used in the winter as well, which is the best time to actually go out when the bracken's down. And so it's a very highly effective way of tackling ponticum. So we can do work on our ground, and this is looking the other direction at the same site at Torridon, and you can actually see in the top right there, you can see all this is the grey area is the stem treated rhododendron, highly effective. But the problem is really is persuading, is tackling the seed source, which has come from a lot of these gardens, and it's been decades there sort of spreading the seed. So the flyers did some good. We had people approaching us to say, would you remove the ponticum from our garden? And these were no small tasks in themselves. You know, some of these gardens were really choked up with it. And in fact, the garden itself had been ruined in that sense because it had just it had overrun it. So we couldn't just do stem treatment at a lot of these sites because you would be left with a lot of dead rhododendron ponticum. So in this case, we've had to come in with chippers, with NTS staff. We've also used contractors through the Wipeout project and just cleared the rhododendron, stump treated, and eliminated that seed source. So just a closer look, this is the same garden, but on the hillside. So it was really problematic, this swathe of ponticum just spreading up the hill, the wind-blown seed spreading right up into all that difficult rocky terrain. And one way that it was rather a catchy sort of title, a plant swap. So one idea working with our horticulturalists within the NTS was to get a list of non-invasive cultivars. So there's many rhododendron species that are not problematic, and we got a sort of almost like a menu of different cultivars that people could choose. And initially, that's how we started this sort of community plant swap sort of engagement community gardens. And this particular area, we did stem treat this, and we left it for the herbicide to take effect. It all died off, and then we came in, and we then just cut that down and left a lot of the dead timber there for firewood. So the residents actually found that quite useful just to use on the wood burners over the years. And you can still see at the back there's rhododendron, that next generation of seed that's starting to march on up the hill. That's all been tackled now with our invasive species ranger, who's been working on that over the winter. So we really are sort of winning the battle there at Torridon. And so, yeah, just to say that, yeah, we're trying to promote a positive, good news story. So we're getting quotes from the neighbours, and we're using this with some of our promotional work. And this is one of the sort of cultivar type rhododendrons that we sort of planted within this garden, just to add back some of that sort of flowering impact that the removal of the ponticum removed at the time.
Rob, there are some questions. I don't know if you want to take them now, or do you want to finish and then take them at the end?
Shall we just rattle on through for continuity and then take them at the end? Yeah.
Perfect.
So here's another garden, just to show that that one of the biggest challenges is removing hedgerows. So people value shelter, particularly in the northwest. So here we've had to just take out, they were quite happy for this hedgerow to go, and you can see we've stump treated here. You can see where the dye is showing the stump treatment, and then the cultivars coming in to replace them. But one thing that I would like to do, which I haven't done yet, is to probably have a positive guidance on how to plant sort of shelter belts within the northwest, not using invasive plants. So some positive messaging, so people that want to get shelter, give them some guidance on how to create that shelter without actually using invasive plants. So again, going on to the importance of language and communication, this has been a big part of my role over the years. And the media can be a double-edged sword, as you can see from this Herald article. It wasn't too friendly. I came back from Christmas break to get this sort of critique. But the National Trust for Scotland themselves are, I guess, have sort of fallen into that trap, maybe using emotive language, the alien species, and you see this a lot in media pieces. So what I tend to prefer now is to use positive language and positive messaging through habitat protection and restoration. This is really what invasive species and rhododendron control is all about. It's just part of the process of land restoration, protection. And this is where the Alliance for Scotland's Rainforest it's been an amalgamation of over 20 organisations, a fantastic organisation, a great think tank. But one of the big things that they've done is to raise the profile of this of the temperate woodland, the Scottish rainforest. So working with them has been very, very useful. It's obviously highlighted the issue of Rhododendron ponticum. So here we are in some Scottish rainforest. This is on the banks of Loch Marie. This was a project I was involved with, and it shows the efficient use of stem treatment again. There's no other technique I would use in this environment. It's steep terrain. You wouldn't want to get machinery in. It would cause a lot of collateral damage. Knapsack spraying again, sensitive sites. You can see these trees cloaked with lichens and mosses. Initially, this is what we're trying to do, is to try and sort of persuade contractors to use it more, because it looks fiddly, and to get in amongst all those stems is a little bit tricky. But I would still say it's certainly more environmentally friendly. It's very efficient, and I would also say it's more cost effective in this particular situation. So a very good technique to use, particularly in that rainforest environment, sensitive sites. So again, another positive story, really. And when I was working with the ranger, we as working as the ranger over at Inview Garden, we started to harvest a lot of the stem-treated rhododendron. And I don't know how many of you out there are doing any charcoal burning, but it's a great activity to do with volunteers. It's quite time-consuming, and I wouldn't say it's lucrative. But it's a great exercise, and the value that I saw in this was that you can see the volunteers, they're sieving and sorting out the charcoal, and they're going into these bags. So we're actually getting a conservation message through that product, and I think that was one of the big values of creating the charcoal. But since then, with the advent of Wipeout, that gave us more funding and resources. So we managed to buy a retort kiln, which is a more sophisticated way of producing a sort of a super charcoal, if you like, biochar, which you might have heard of. There's quite a lot of excitement around biochar now. It carbon sequestrates. It turns. Well, I've used this sort of slogan, if you like, turning a problem into a solution. And rather than talk too much about it, we put this together into a little 3-minute film, which I think I'd like to show you, and it'll just save my voice a little bit, and we'll hopefully can take some questions after that. Okay.
I'll just take control back.
Thank you.
And wait for you. Can you hear that? Okay.
You still hear me there?
We can.
Yeah, so very quickly, in summary, guys, we found it's important to work inclusively, involve the communities with any landscape control work if you're going to be ultimately successful. We've tried to explain what we're trying to achieve through workshops, volunteer sessions, talks. Our invasive rangers now are also keeping the community updated with the regular newsletters. I think the importance of language and communication, use habitat restoration rather than alien species or roadie bashing. And it's important to get that over, that why we're doing this in a positive way. Engage and offer to carry out work will be an incentive, and it will help sort of bring people on board, win hearts and minds. And we found there's less resistance to use stem treatment rather than guys out in chemical suits and spraying knapsack train. And it's very useful on sensitive sites, and also when you're working in sites like community gardens. Thank you for listening. I'm happy if we've got time for any questions.
Thank you, Rob. Thanks very much indeed. We have questions in the chat. I don't know if you're able to pull the questions up, but I'll read them to you. So Ed had an overarching question, which I think Gordon has given his contributions to, but his question was that given that it will be cost prohibitive to eradicate all rhododendron in the rainforest zone, should we not focus on small scale invasions onto new sites as the main aim across the whole of the zone? Do you have a response? At you, Rob?
Yeah, this question, I know working with my own staff sometimes, because we've got invasion coming from different boundaries, as Gordon mentioned, you know, this invasive species don't understand boundaries, and the difficulties of where you prioritize. In an ideal world, you want a landscape scale, long-term collaborative program to see for that ultimately to be successful. But I'd also probably say that doing something to stop the spread in the seed source, even in the short term, to get volunteers or in community engagement as much as possible, is better than not doing anything at all. But it's just a case of how you prioritize where you do these sites. And you can tackle rhododendron, so you just protect a particularly important, perhaps rainforest, particularly important designated site. But it just means that you're going to have to ongoing work to keep that site free unless you work on a full collaborative landscape scale process.
Fabulous. Naomi asked about stem treatment. That she says, I assume you mean poison by stem treatment.
Yes, using herbicide, but it's a very targeted way, and it avoids the use of knapsack spraying and collateral damage to the vegetation.
And Tom asks, how effective was the stump treatment and what arrangement was in place to do the work in private gardens?
Yes, the stump treatment, if you cut rhododendron, like any plant, there's a vigor in the system that wants to grow back. So I find that treating stumps is not as effective as drilling into a bush that's then left. The herbicide goes around the system. I find that more effective than cutting stumps, but there will be some more follow-up, I would say, with the stump treatment. But it does work to a degree. It's just less impact, it's less efficacious, less efficient at the outset. You have to go back and tackle it again.
Okay, I'm jumping about questions here, but I'm trying to get a thread. So Naomi asked in the back of that, if you treat the stumps after cutting with poison, is there any study done on how the weed killer affects the local area? Does it seep into the soil or affect the animal life?
Little bit of study on that the National Trust for Scotland did at NVU. We've got a lot of gardeners there, and like a lot of people, nobody likes to use herbicide. I don't like to use it, and there's concern about glyphosate, and so we actually had some soil studies done. It was really, and it showed that after about 3 years, the residue within the soil from stem treatment was negligible. It was 0.something%. Whereas areas that had been sprayed, there was a more significant level of glyphosate still left in the soil.
Thank you. And what's the best time of year to carry out stem treatment? Nev's asking.
Outside the mid-season. Yeah, no, the great thing about stem treatment is you can do it any time of year. You can even do it in sort of drizzly, sort of streak type weather, so that's another advantage. So I tend to work when the vegetation's down, you can see what you're doing, and you haven't got the beastly midges attacking you.
Perfect. Kat's asking, did the rhododendron really help with rock falls in Torridon, or was it just a perception that it did?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't think it did. We've got trees coming up now. We're obviously doing deer culls there as well, and we're starting to get woodland establishing at the back of that. I think where it's argued where you have a real strong big wall of mature rhododendron, it probably would stop some of the smaller rockfalls bouncing through. So, but anything major, it's not going to. It is more of a perception, as you said.
Thank you. Nev's asking Rob if you'd mind sharing the list of cultivars. Now, I don't know if you're able to put that into the chat or if you want to send it to me and I can email it out to
If I
everybody.
forward you through a PDF, yes, we've got a list of species you can use.
That would be great. And I think Nev's also asked about charcoal, and they're making excellent charcoal in a retort kiln using ash from dieback management, but they're having difficult getting roadies to burn properly. So if you can offer any advice on methodology, maybe that has been answered from watching the video, Nev, but if there's any other questions, maybe, or even if you share an email and maybe Nev could email you directly, Rob, that would be great.
I think if it's seasoned well, you shouldn't have a problem. Certainly not in a retort kiln. That burns at very high temperature, but it's important to season it.
Naomi wants to know if there's a license required to do stem treatment.
If you're working professionally, you should have your Peer 1, Peer 6, even though you're not using an app. So I would endorse, I've been pushing for this, if we can get some sort of certificate that would just allow you to apply, to drill and then to apply it with a dispenser. If we could do that, that would be it would be a really good way of getting more people involved in it, I think. Okay.
So maybe you could pick up some chat with Naomi about this, Rob, in the chat after, because she says that she's not, they're a community group. And Tom says, Gordon, is there a date we can expect the new Forestry Commission guidance that you talked about?
Yeah, I'm just typing an answer to that in the chat.
Okay,
it's been
perfect.
signed off by Scottish Forestry for launch by Cabinet Secretary. However, then they announced a general election, and that's kind of put the so that's probably delayed it basically until sometime late July. But I haven't got a date for it. It is due this summer though, and it has, as I say, it's been signed off by Scottish Forestry Board, so it's good to go basically.
Gordon, I'm sure Community Woodland Association will hear about it, so look out for that in any of our newsletters or bulletins, and we will share a link once that is published. Yeah. Okay, we are absolutely bang on time. Do you want to take a little screen break? Yes or no, or just get up and shake about a little bit and then sit back down again. We have 10 minutes apportioned at the end to do panel questions. So if we have the screen break, we won't have the 10 minutes. So it's entirely up to yourself. If you wouldn't mind giving me your suggestions in the chat, then we can decide how we go forward. Yes or no? Happy to keep going. Perfect. Well, let's do that then. Please feel free, if you want to move about, to do that. Just turn your screens off. That'd be wonderful. Perfect. We're going to keep going. Lovely. Good. Okay. Grant, over to you if you want to take control. Well done. Thank you.
Hi. Can you hear me?
We can hear you. Yes, we can.
Screen break.
Nope,
1, 2, 3. Done.
Well done.
There we go. This is me. I'm happy to be interrupted if Sharon, if Sharon thinks we've got time and that it's appropriate. So feel free to stick your hand up or wave your arms around or whatever you fancy doing. But I'll leave it to Sharon to decide how to play it. Here we go. I'm just going to give you a run through of our experience, and I dare say I'll miss things out, and hopefully there'll be some questions and things if anything's not clear. I've been a forester here at Knoydart since 1994, and my first roadie work was in Lochstriven and Cowell in 1984. Can you put your hands up, the folk that have managed roadies before? Can I get some audience participation going here, I wonder? I can see some hands. I can't see all the faces.
Yeah, at the moment we've got 6, 7 hands up, 8 hands up.
Great. Well, it's a fantastic thing. I'm sure everybody should do it at some point in their life. A little bit of background. So we, the local community, bought the Knoydart, what was left of the Knoydart estate in 1999. I'll try not to make you seasick by waggling my mouse around too much, but there's where we are, just to the left of, just to the right of Skye. And I work for the Knoydart Forest Trust, so we're a separate community company to the Knoydart Foundation that owns the land, and we manage the woodland, the community-owned woodland, and quite a lot of neighbouring privately owned woodlands through various agreements. Good. There's some stretching going on. I approve. Who's stretching? Good. Sorry, I'll try and keep on track. So in 1999, we put together our long-term woodland management plan, and that, oh, something's happening with the slides. I've lost the slides.
Okay,
Somebody...
bear with me. Yeah, I'll need to, I think you've pressed stop sharing. So
I don't think, oh.
It can happen easily, Grant, don't worry about it. It might just take a wee while to...
I think there's a bug. I think somebody's up to something. Tom, was that you?
Oh, it was somebody's fessing up in the chat. Thank you, folks. It'll take a couple of seconds to upload because there's a video in it, so you might want to just get up and stretch whilst we're doing it. Use the time, folks. It's just a hefty presentation. Sarah, you were quietly wishing that you had a screen break. That's what it was.
Gordon's leading by example there.
Yes,
Can you
yes,
see what's
indeed.
going out the window? Head's back.
A bit of a pace when here we go. It's coming now. So we just need to resume where we were. Is that where you
great.
were? Yeah. So if you just take control back, then thank you.
Take control. There we go. I've got the power. So initially, we decided that we were going to try and control the roadies because we didn't think that eradication was a realistic option. It was just, and at the time it wasn't a realistic option, and it certainly wouldn't have been popular. But after a few years, confidence grew, and and after much community discussion, we decided that eradication was actually possible. We sort of woke up one day and realised, gosh, this is actually working, and we could actually eradicate it. So from then on, it was sort of full steam ahead. And there was it was contentious, and there was falling out, but there was a lot of support as well. We definitely didn't have 100% support, and that was difficult in a small place. We had to think about gardens and neighbours to fulfil the eradication, and that's really sensitive. And some people are totally fine with that, but other people think that you're trying to tell them what to do, and they don't like that. But it's important. Media, there's some mixed messages going on in there. I don't know what to add to that. So we had an area of search. We've got the community owns about 7,000 hectares, and there's all the adjoining land outside those red lines on the map there. We prioritised into high, medium, and low. So the red's the high priority density stuff. The green's the low, lower density stuff. Shouldn't really say prioritised, because that brings us back to that discussion about whether you should spend a lot of money doing the really thick stuff, or whether you should go and do the spreading, small colonising stuff, and where's the best place to spend your money. But my answer to that discussion would be, it's important to work at a population scale. So if you've got a small population in a not very sensitive habitat, then there's a high value in doing that because it's a small population and it's good value for money. If you've got a dense, difficult to expensive population in a very sensitive habitat, then the sensitivity of the habitat justifies it. Constraints. So there's lots of water supplies in our woods. There's archaeology, there's neighbours, there's ownership, complicated ownership boundaries. Before you set out on a project like this, you have to understand your constraints well. And I would totally support Rob's suggestion that you need a local ranger, somebody that lives in the place, that knows the folk of the ground and that can work all this sort of stuff out. You're not going to be able to do that remotely. And slides aren't moving. Funding. The funding, we started this 10 years ago, in 1999. So it took us about 10 years to do the main clearance, and the funding was a real mishmash of woodland grant scheme, Scottish forestry grant scheme, bits of European money, lottery money, bits of SNH money, and it was a real sort of mess of funding applications. I don't know what the collective term is for a burach of funding applications. And really, to sensibly, there needs to be a sensible long-term funding strategy. Some statistics: if you squashed all our roadies into one area without any open ground, it would be about 35 hectares, but that was spread throughout about 556 hectares. So it was quite a big area with roadies dotted all about, some dense, some not so dense. It took about 10 years to do the main clearance, but we're still at it after 24 years. Rob thinks he's broken the back of it at Torridon, but and hopefully he has, but it's a long slog. It's an ongoing process. We reckon, we sort of boast that we've now got 700 hectares of without roadies. A lot of that didn't have roadies in it in the first place, so it's kind of cheating a bit. We covered eight woodland owners plus lots of gardens, and at the last count it was 250,000. That'll have gone up by now, and it was a lot of people over a long period of time. This is just some before and after pictures. Top left is a rhododendron tunnel, so that was one of the last bits to cut, because that was really unpopular to cut this sort of magnificent tunnel through the roadies. And the picture below that shows the what was left after we cleared the tunnel, and obviously, and you can see how dead it is, and there's very little life there at all, except for my daughter for scale. And then on the right, that's a few years later, and the regeneration's taken off, and it's a sort of diverse native woodland now with all sorts of things going on. I have no idea why this slide's in this presentation, but I thought it was kind of a fun slide, and hopefully hopefully it'll keep folk awake. So the way we did it, we did this a while ago, and back in those days there really was only one kind of tried and tested method, and that was cut it down, burn the brash, leave it for a couple of years, and then spray the regrowth. That's what we did, and it works. But there's lots of buts. But it definitely works. And the main but is that it involves lots of spraying of glyphosate. And as Michael Caine said, wait till you see the whites of their eyes. Don't make the mistake of spraying the regrowth when it's too small, before it's properly grown. If there aren't enough leaves on the plant won't absorb enough chemical to kill it. There's no point in half killing it, because then it will just grow back and you'll have to spray it again. The point is, if you're going to spray glyphosate around about the countryside, it needs to work. The worst thing is to go and spray chemicals and then for the roadies to grow back, and that's quite a common thing. So you've got to take it seriously, you've got to make it work, and there's no point in spraying it half-heartedly. Roundup Probioactive is, and maybe was, I haven't checked recently, the only glyphosate without an orange triangle. So it's not classified as hazardous. It hasn't got a hazard warning classification. Now, if you're cynical, you'll say that's because it's made by Monsanto. And I've just remembered that this is being recorded, so I'll obviously look forward to hearing from Monsanto. The World Health Organization say that glyphosate is of negligible risk, but you do have to wonder if there's a future for glyphosate and what that would mean for roadies. Other methods of treatment are available, and stem injection, if we were doing it all over again, I'm sure that we would be doing a lot of stem injection, and that's a much more better way of using the chemical. It's much more controlled, much less chemical used, and you're putting the chemical exactly where you need to put it, and it seems to me a much better idea. And it means you don't have to cut the stuff down, and it means that you're left with some nice standing deadwood, which maybe doesn't look very nice. Somebody's put a question in the chat. Can I do two things at once? Probably not. How quickly did regeneration take place? It takes a surprisingly long time. It takes a long time for the ground to recover from the rhododendrons themselves, and then you go and spray it, and then it's going to take time to recover from spraying it. But after that, maybe sort of 4-year cycle, then the regeneration starts to really take over, and it colonizes very quickly after a spell. And then there's the question about, if you're cutting it, then what should you do with the arisings? What should you do with the brash? And the convention always used to be that you would burn it, and I never really understood why you would burn it. And I would suggest that a much better system is, if you are cutting it, much better simply to leave the stuff stacked in rows up and down the wood, and let the stuff sort itself out. I think the main reason why that people burn roadies is because volunteers like doing it and folk like doing it. It generally keeps people's spirits up, and I don't really see a good reason for it. Here's a heads up. Roundup has a shelf life of about 18 months max, which it doesn't say on the label. There's no greater waste of your time spraying or injecting with old chemicals. Great, I didn't know that. That's a good point. Petrol, apparently petrol's got a shelf life as well, I didn't realise. Anyway, other methods, lever and mulch. So here's Gordon and the famous duo, I've forgotten his name, somebody will remind me. And it is possible to manually pull the biggest bushes of roadies out of the ground. Whether or not it's cost effective, and whether or not there are enough people on the planet that are willing to do it is another question. But it does work, and it is amazing what you can do with a bit of physical exertion and a bit of craft, or a lot of craft. Stem injection we've talked about. Another option is to get a digger. You can do a lot with a digger on particular sites, maybe less sensitive sites, but there is the spraying issue if you're going to use a digger. And then the process, chunk it up. If you've got it's an enormous task. You break it down into subcompartments and work away on each subcompartment, take each off at a time. Don't move on to the next subcompartment till you've finished the previous one. You don't get your pudding till you've finished your tea. If there's anything worth remembering, I'm looking for. Thanks, Gordon. Yeah, got a glimmer from Gordon. And then you can budget your resources per compartment, and it just makes it all more manageable to break it all down. And then the follow-up. There's no point in going to that effort if you're not going to follow up. You can spray the stuff, you can pull the stuff out the ground, or you can whack it with a hammer. I know on pulling it out the ground, you can't actually just pull the stuff out the ground. If you try and pull even a small seedling out of the ground, 99 times out of 100, it'll snap at the what you might call the stump and leave a little bit of the stump in the ground. If you want to get a seedling out of the ground, you need to dig it up. You need to get in there with your fingers, or claw hammer is really handy, and actually loosen the soil round about it, and then get your hand round about the stump of the seedling or the bush, and pull the thing up. The rhodea will only grow back from existing dormant buds on the stem or on the stump. They don't have any dormant buds on the roots, so it's perfectly safe to leave roots in the ground, but you mustn't leave any of the stump in the ground. And if you break a root off, there's always a little bit of stump attached to the root. So there is a little bit of craft involved in pulling up a rhodea bush, and it's worth making the effort and spending the time, because if you do it right, then it will be successful, and that thing will never grow back. But if you do it wrong, all you've done is hide the problem for 2 or 3 years until it grows back and comes back to haunt you. How am I doing for time?
So 5 minutes at the end of your slot, and then the 10-minute questions, but you've got 50 minutes in total before the end. It's 1:45.
Cool. So so we're still at it. In 2021, 2020-21, we had an FGS funded follow-up operation, and we tried to cover all the ground, 556 hectares on a 10-metre grid, to search for occasional bushes and plants that had popped up over the time, and we're still at it. It's an ongoing process. I've stopped paying attention to the chat, so let me know if there's anything interesting going on there. So
lots of chat about micro and mini mattocks.
Great.
Sharing comments there.
There's various things out there. I haven't found the perfect one yet, but we've tried various. I'll kind of medium-sized mattock that you can use with one hand. I've seen, but never managed to find one in the shops. The hammer is really good, because hammers are available and handy, and there's always one around, and if you're going for a walk, stick a hammer in your bag, because you will manage with a hammer. It's not ideal, but you will manage, and if you've got one, you'll do an awful lot better than with nothing at all with a hammer. So we, as part of a lottery project, we wanted to explain to we wanted to sort of remind the community and ourselves and some new people in the community that the roadies used to exist, because if you wander about the place, you don't really see the roadies. So it's like, well, what's the problem? What's all the fuss about? And so partly to remind folk of the need to carry on into the village, and also to try and get folks help, we came up with this report a roadie scheme, where in theory you can report, if you see a roadie somewhere, you can report it and it pops up on a website, and then we can go and find it. We haven't mastered that. We haven't mastered the tech to make that actually work efficiently, but we do have a process where people are now aware of the issue and will constantly come up to me and others and say, I saw a roadie up behind the church, or whatever it was. And so we've got a way of recording and dealing with that. And here's the link to the Report a Roadie site. As I say, we haven't really mastered it. It more works on an informal basis. And then there's Avenza. I'm sure some of you will have Avenza or have used Avenza or are aware of what I mean. It's an app on your phone. You can upload maps and you can mark waypoints on the map. So what we are doing now when we are removing these occasional seedlings that pop up all over the place is we're marking it on the Avenza. Or if we see a rhodium, we don't pull it up, we mark it on the Avenza. And that means we've got a handy record. And what it means is we know where the hot spots are. We know where we need to go back to in a few years, because there's bound to be some there, because that's where we found lots of seedlings in the previous effort. And there's a little story behind this map on the left. There's a garden that's still got some roadies round about it, and the householder there wasn't keen for us to remove the roadies. And so we've been monitoring that, and this is the only significant patch of roadies that we haven't been able to tackle. So we've been monitoring what's going on round about there, and using the Avenza to mark where the seedlings are, we've created this heat map. So the dark red patches on the map there we pulled out 236 seedlings per hectare, or is it per quarter hectare? And the pale yellow, there was one seedling per sample, and that shows quite clearly that there are dense seedling recolonizing areas of the woodland upwind of the retained bushes. And we now need to share this information with the householder and say, these retained bushes are causing a problem. We need to do something about it. This is threatening the whole project. Anyway, the point of this story is more about the usefulness of using something like Avenza to keep records. And then you need to monitor it, you need to follow up, you need to repeat that, and then you need to monitor it, and then you need to follow up, and then you need to repeat that, and then you need to monitor it, and you need to follow up, and then you repeat that. You get the idea. Sorry to those to whom I'm teaching to suck eggs. And then when you get to that stage, you get the t-shirt. And this is just some daft slides while I read the chat. Sharon, do you want to help me out with the chat? What is there anything in there that I should be?
Of course. So we've got all the questions about the micromatics. Let me just see. Managed to get on top. So Ed's saying we managed to get on top of it in a triple SI rainforest site using only lever and mulch methods. Volunteers helped. Advantages that it engages folk who do not want to use herbicides. Sarah is asking if you had a couple of specific policy asks of politicians or ministers regarding rodent control, what would it be?
Policy asks.
Yeah, and that was for everybody, but
Gordon will give a more competent answer to this than I will, but enough money to do it properly and enough commitment to see it through. There's no point in fiddling around at the edges or going into things half-heartedly. If you put the effort in and the commitment in, it is achievable. It will work, but there needs to be the commitment there, and that needs long-term commitment from politicians as well as people on the ground.
Perfect, thank you. And let me see what else have we got here. Questions to anyone. What did your survey efforts look like prior to removal efforts? How granular approach did you take? And did you use Scottish Commission classification or some other scale?
We used our existing woodland compartments. That gives the thing some structure. And then we just wondered about, estimated the percentage of cover within that compartment, recorded the area of that compartment, and then the size in terms of, I can't remember what the height, small, medium, large. You really have to work. You really have to work that out, dependent on the site and how varied the site is. But there is a big element of sticking your finger in the air and making your best guess at it. But the more you break it down into compartments, the more reliable that will be.
I think a lot of, if I can just come in there, a lot of the survey work is useful at the outset, and largely to sort of raise grants and great funding. So the SRDP would have had a particular type of classification of bush types, but since that time, certainly with the use of stem treatment, there's a funding for £3,000 per hectare. And it was just one sort of broad rate for stem treatment. But really the type of, I'm tending to adapt now with our surveys so that we've got an ongoing, so our ranges now are mapping where they're coming across bushes. So we've got this point distribution. So where you have a flowering bush, we basically do an ongoing survey where if you come across flowering bushes, the idea now is not to allow anything to flower. So you're always going, you are reaching that end game in that sense if you've not got flowering bushes, so you constantly go in the right direction. But if you are, for example, finding them, that you would map that so that any future staff would be able to look at that ongoing survey and think, well, this was a flowering bush way up the hill at this point. It's a good chance we can go back there and just check up any sort of seedlings following. So there's different type of surveys, I think, for given situations, and I'm tending to work with a sort of an ongoing rolling system now for logging what we have out there and doing monitoring with that.
Thank you, folks. I'm just sharing finally this my feedback link. I will send this out to you in an email, everybody, but just if we could capture some feedback. Our funders ask that we give feedback to them on how informative and how useful these sessions are for our members and other guests attending. And also just wanted to raise with you that we previously did, and I think it was in 2021, both Grant and Gordon presented on rhododendron management previously, and a CW information note was created as a result of that. Now, I've put the link in the chat for you if you wanted to have a look at that. That will probably need updated, and I might come back to our presenters today to actually maybe get you to read through and see if there's any changes that you feel need made going forward, and we'll upload that onto our website. I'm going to stop sharing this, and if people want to just come in, put their hands up, and we'll have face-to-face interaction for the rest of the meeting rather than through the chat, that would be lovely. Gordon.
Yeah, just going some more information on the survey techniques. I guess that particularly when you're starting off, what surveying does is inform the cost of the project, the funding the project requires to move ahead, and that's the trickiest bit. If you underestimate the amount of rhododendron there, then you won't ask for enough money off funders, and going back for more money is always a trickier business than asking for it in the first place. So it is important to get a good grasp on what's there, and that's a skill basically. So the fine art of rhododendron surveying is not straightforward in terms of judging quite what is within a thicket. Some folk, and particularly the Countryside Trust, Argyll and the Isles Coast and Countryside Trust, have been using drones to survey rhododendron and to establish quantity that way. They've just put the work that's arisen from that drone survey out to tender, and I guess we're about to see whether it's whether the contractors believe what the drones say or not. So it probably requires some ground truthing as well as drone work. Having said that, we're just at the moment, the Native Woods Co-op are using drones to survey for skunk cabbage, or have been whilst it was in flower a month ago. And it's a really effective way of trying to find out where skunk cabbage is on pretty naturalistic river system where there are large areas of inaccessible ground, and we need to find where the top of the skunk cabbage is in the catchment to know where the stuff is coming from. So I think there will be innovative techniques coming in and more use being made of these as we move forward. But it is really important when you're putting together a multi-million-pound project to have some idea of whether it's a million or $1.5 million of funding that you require to deal with the problem, because increasingly we are being asked to work at that larger scale. I would say the other thing is, and Rob's experience probably bears this out as well, is that there's a lot of difference in the cost. So if you're surveying somebody's garden or a hillside, the approach and the costs associated with removal from a garden as against from a hillside or a plantation can be very different, because gardeners have different expectations, and really to get them on board the project, you have to meet their expectations to bring them along.
Perfect. Any other questions? We've got a couple of minutes left. Oh, we've lost Grant. Back in. Ed, your hand's up. You just unmute your mic, please.
Hang on. Yeah, early on in Gordon's presentation, can you hear me now?
We can.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. It was just that Gordon mentioned two really important things. One was halting invasion on restock sites. The other was this small-scale invasion into new sites. Now, having done this work, rhododendron clearance, for over 10 years now, this seems to me absolutely vital that these two issues are dealt with, you know, at the whole rainforest zone. They are cost-effective, they're cheap, and but they need doing, and they're not being done. And my point is they are just not being done. I mean, in my area I live in, they're not being done. And everywhere I go, if I drive around the rainforest zone, they're not being done. So how do we get this done? Because otherwise, you know, we're going to just be putting money into small scale projects. You know, they're supposed to be landscape scale, but the problem is so huge and it's so urgent and it's spreading so fast that unless we deal with these two things immediately, the problem is funders like to do big projects, but how do we do these smaller scale projects and get them done? How do we get the funding to do that urgently? That's my big question.
I can have a go at that. I did, Ed. I tried to answer your question in the chat as well.
Yeah.
I think there is something about land management and the responsibilities of land managers. At the rainforest zone at the moment receives about £50 million a year in public subsidy for land use. So that's a lot of that goes into sheep farming. Some of it goes into conifer plantations. Some of it goes into rainforest restoration. But that is a substantial sum of money. And there is a requirement under the present subsidy scheme that farmers keep their ground, land managers keep their ground in good agricultural and environmental condition as a condition of that funding. It would seem that it would be a straightforward matter to require landowners to deal with small invasions of invasive rhododendron as a condition of subsidy support. Obviously, if there's a big problem, they're never going to manage it. But if it is a few bushes, then that's very dealable with. The other thing the Scottish Government could do is actually tighten up their own, and the local authorities, is tighten up on their own road management processes. The thing that spreads rhododendron most freely is the automobile along our trunk roads, which is, Ed, why you see so much of this stuff. So it's spreading quite dramatically along road verges. So BARE Scotland, Transport Scotland and local authorities, Highland and Argyll councils, have responsibility for those areas. If they took that a little bit seriously, then that would also stop it spreading.
Yeah, good. Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Folks, I'm aware we're over our time. It's 2 minutes past 12. There's one hand up, so if we take Douglas's question and then there's something in the chat that maybe some of our presenters could ask, and then that will be us. Okay, Douglas, over to you.
Yeah. So my question is sort of just looking for a little bit of advice in terms of like cultural association of rhododendron, where I'm sort of trying to implement control. There's small pushback from the community, but what I mainly find actually is pushback from the trust that I work for itself. We have quite big issues in that the trust has sort of associations with the rhododendron being there as part of their childhoods, and just being part of their identity for the area almost. And it's just, I was wondering how people sort of dealt with these discussions in the past, because I found that I've constantly sort of found myself up against brick walls when I'm trying to talk to these people about, we need to implement some kind of control mechanism, and it needs to be done quite urgently. But there's almost like a denial that the rhododendron is an issue at all, and that the spread of it is not occurring, when, you know, you look at records and it certainly is. I understand it's a very difficult conversation and a difficult thing to answer, but I was just wondering if anyone had any sort of general advice about that kind of stuff.
Grant, yeah, Grant, do you want to come in there?
Yeah, I mean, I recognise, you know, where you're coming from, and there are some folk who just think it's lovely, and just don't see a problem. And the more that you try and persuade them, the more entrenched they get. So I suppose our strategy was work round about them, try not to antagonise them any more than necessary, and hope that they'll come on board in the long run. And that's kind of worked, except for one. And you know, and that, yeah.
I think the only thing I could add to that, really, Grant, it's if people are putting forward the case of it being a sort of culturally significant plant, and they may well have grown up with it, you know. And I know Wales, the coach parties would be going through there just to see the wonderful flowering rhododendron, and that was a battle with the trust down in Wales, a £7 million worth life programme, trying to clear the national park of it there. But I suppose it would be to try and, if the cultural argument is the case there, something that something feel connected to, or they actually like the bush itself, is to try and turn that round on its head, to actually put the case for that, preserving that environment through the culture and through what is the natural biodiversity of that habitat, that whether it be the woodland or the moorland. And you'll soon find that the case it outweighs that of a monoculture. I think somebody said earlier on about, you know, what questions you'd had for government. When we start moving into strategies and things, it becomes very, very complicated. And I think the way of dealing with things is regional catchment scales, invasive species type programs, where everybody has a part to play through communities, local authorities, a better overarching strategy from the government top down, so that funding comes from all sorts of different streams, and a little bit more jurisdiction, a little bit more stick as well as the carrot. So there isn't one answer to this. It is many different answers and pulling together. And as you pointed out with that question, it is also, you know, trying to get that well of support from the people that live within that environment.
Thank you very much indeed, everybody. Can I just take this opportunity on behalf of Community Woodlands Association to thank our presenters for today's session. It's been hugely informative, and also to thank you, our attendees, for really engaging and asking really pertinent questions which have been useful for everybody. It's been an absolute delight to be here with you today. This recording will go on to CWA's YouTube channel and be shared with you, and I will email you all with a feedback request as well, and a PDF of the slides. So thank you once again for attending, and I hope you have a very good rest.